Hey Allison, thanks for joining me.
Hi, how's it going?
I love the awkward fake starts.
I know.
Yeah, that's why I like to record like from the beginning, but then there's always some problem with someone's Wi-Fi or someone's recording
I know.
apparatus or whatever it
It's
is. So then you have
truly
to do the
it
fake start.
it truly seems like you can just never get it first go,
Yeah.
but
Um, cool. All right. It might be nice maybe for people who don't know you to just kind of like give a kind of like I hate it when people ask me to do introductions to myself, but just like, you know, what's Allison Vest about? Can you give us a few sentences?
yeah, well, I currently live in Salt Lake City. I am a professional rock climber. I started climbing when I was 5, so I've been climbing basically my whole life. And competing when I was 10. And then I sort of transitioned out of competing a couple of years ago now. And just climb on the rock full time, mostly bouldering with a dabble of sport climbing in there as well.
Oh, I haven't heard of your sport climbing.
I
You
know we
kept that
haven't,
quiet.
well, I haven't necessarily had any sport ambitions on the horizon, so that might be
Okay.
why.
Okay. Um, and then I also feel like maybe people know you from your like infamous Instagram account where you post lots of either fun, silly games and challenges or like epic feats of strength. I feel like that's often the two types of posts.
For sure, those that's definitely quite common. Yeah, I think those fun challenges are also usually harder than they look. Like I usually am super sore the next day. Um, and I don't know, I think that's like a big thing for me is keeping climbing fun because I think my reflex is to take everything too seriously. So that's like a good reminder for me to have fun and not take everything too seriously. And then yeah, usually the feats of strength are mostly finger strength related. And I've really like leaned into that in the past couple of years. Um, really since I started climbing outside, I feel like you don't necessarily rely on that intense of crimp strength in comps. I mean, you'll get one hold here or there, but I didn't really know that that was something I was really good at until I started climbing outside. So,
Right. Nice. Yeah, I want to get into the like taking things seriously and playfulness thing in a bit because I find that, well, I imagine that a lot of people who see your account might think that you're not the kind of person to take things too seriously. So it would be cool to get into that.
yeah,
But
for
first,
sure.
I want to ask you a little bit about like what was climbing like for you when you started climbing and like more specifically around your mindset. Like what did your mindset look like in your early days?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I came by climbing really honestly. Like would my parents would send me to preschool and I would be climbing on the jungle gym and the monkey bars so much that I would come home with my hands bleeding when I was, yeah, I think 4. So then my dad Googled climbing gym and I had my 5th birthday party there. I think the birthday party
Nice.
thing is kind of a classic
Mm-hmm.
climbing origin story,
Yeah.
um, but yeah, I don't know. I think it always just sort of made sense. Like it wasn't necessarily something that I even really wanted. It was just what I was doing at the time. So it just always, I think, felt really natural for me to be climbing. And I think at this point, like, I don't remember a time when I wasn't climbing, except I did quit for a year when I was a teenager and decided I wanted to become a dancer.
Nice.
And that did that for a year and then circle back.
What
But
what made you circle back?
it's hard to start being a dancer when you're 15. That's like a tough, and climbers aren't super known for being graceful on the flat ground. So it was a tough transition. I think I was gonna be much more graceful and a better dancer in my head, and I just wasn't. And I think I also liked being good at things. So when I wasn't very good at it, that you know, I decided I would rather finish what I started and keep climbing. But yeah, I
Nice.
think just growing up in climbing, it always felt like I think like a safe space for me for that reason. I struggled in school with being a perfectionist and wanting to do everything and take all the classes I could and try to do all the extracurriculars. And I played all the sports in middle school and high school. I played basketball and ran cross country and track and played volleyball for a little bit too. But yeah, climbing just always felt like the place where I felt like most myself and felt the most natural. And I think I also struggled to be confident through all of those other things. And it was easiest for me to feel confident when I was climbing.
Mm. Do you think that climbing gave you more confidence than you would have had as like a default?
Yeah, I think the competitive nature of it is always interesting. I think competitions inspire a bigger range of emotions than climbing outside does. It has higher highs than I've ever experienced climbing outside, but it also has way lower lows. Um, so, I mean, I think it would have been, I would have probably hopefully found it somewhere else, but for whatever reason, that was sort of what I naturally gravitated towards. And so that's what just felt the most comfortable to me. But I mean, that said, I think competing, I always struggled to like believe in myself, and sort of expected the worst outcome at every competition, and then was always like, yeah, I don't know, using that as a coping mechanism to like hopefully prepare myself to in case I failed, which isn't the best mindset to be in when you're going into a competition. Um, but yeah, I think yeah, competition is interesting in that way because I think you really it's the highs are short lived and you got to figure out how to manage those lows because that's usually what lasts longer.
Mm. Why do you think the highs are so much higher for competing versus outdoor climbing?
um, I think outdoor climbing, it's a lot easier to really narrow in and be mindful of the fact that it's just you and the boulder. And it's a more sort of holistic, I think, experience in that sense. Like it's you and the rock's not going to change. You can come back tomorrow. And if you don't do it today, maybe that's annoying, but there'll be another day, there'll be another season. You can go back next time. Um, and in competition, you're just so thrown into one moment and you have to be
Mm.
on that exact moment. And maybe you're not feeling good and you have to push through anyway. And you're in direct comparison with 100 other people who are also competing on that same day. And so I think just the how fast it is and how there's other people that are there directly and there's a giant, crowd sometimes of hundreds of people watching and the lights and the MC. And I think just there's so much stimulation going on from so many different directions. Um, and yeah, I mean, sometimes you train your whole life for one big competition and it comes down to the last boulder and the last attempt in 30 seconds. And so you have this culmination of all of your years of training and you have to be on at one time. And those fleeting moments where it just works out in your favor, the rush of emotion is crazy. And I think that's like kind of what you see even when you watch a World Cup and somebody wins. Like last night for me, or day for me, but night in Innsbruck, Janja just won her first World Cup again since coming back, and she's won how many World Cups at this point? So many. But it was for whatever reason, I think the pressure was building for her. She didn't win her first one back. And she still, after having won however many she won, just broke down into tears after she won in Innsbruck. So I think it's that kind of, you have all these things. Like for her, it was maybe like an injury. She had won the Olympic medal. She was coming back, like for whatever reason, no matter how many times you've won or lost, or vice versa, you have one moment to be your best.
Mm.
And it's a lot of pressure. And then when that pressure is like relieved and it works out, I think that is something that is really hard to find climbing outside.
Yeah, interesting. Um, it's interesting as well because like everything you describe there is psychological, isn't it? It's like
Mm-hmm.
it's how you manage that pressure, that's kind of the crux of competing, really. I mean, obviously you all have to be really strong and technically up there and everything. Um, but I guess all that goes to waste if you don't turn that pressure into like a good performance. How did you find that pressure when you were competing? Did you have any tools to manage it? And was any of that connected to your decision to move away from the comps?
Yeah, I was definitely not very good at it. Which is definitely is one of the reasons I stepped away for sure. I think my mind was always something that held me back. Um, I think I tend to fixate on things and get obsessive about things and dwell on small details, which when you're competing, you only have 5 minutes on a boulder and then you'll never see that boulder again in your entire life. Like it's gone. Um, and so I think I just started realizing that, yeah, psychologically, I just was better suited for projecting outside because in my head, if I had to go back to the same thing like 100 times, I would do it. If I really decided I wanted to do something, I would, and I believed I could, I would go back as many times as it took. Whereas in comps, it doesn't really work like that. Like you sort of have to be more open-minded about it and flexible, and also just sort of have a blind faith that if you just keep working, eventually you're going to get better. But it's not as easy to measure as it is when you're climbing outside. Like I climb this grade, I climb this grade, even though grades are subjective too, but or I'm working on this project and I'm getting closer and closer and closer and closer. In comps, you're sort of just like training to get stronger, but you don't really know what you're going to get. So you don't really know what you're training for necessarily. So it's a lot more kind of feels like a stab in the dark, um, unless you're one of the best who's really proficient at everything. Um, but yeah, psychologically, I didn't handle that pressure well. Um, I think when I first started realizing that was I showed up to Canadian Nationals one year, and Alana Yip, who's one of the best competitive boulders Canada's had, she went to the Olympics, wasn't there. She wasn't competing. And I walked into isolation and somebody just immediately said, "Oh, Alana's not here. Like, it'll probably be an easy win for you or something." And I sort of realized that I was expected to win and I had lived most of my life underperforming. I think probably mostly because of psychology. I always felt really strong, but I always would really crumble under the pressure and not quite get to where I wanted. And so, yeah, it was sort of the first time I'd ever not been an underdog. My first nationals when Alana was there, and I beat her by one attempt, and I was super not supposed to beat her. Um, like there was a camera crew even who had been told to like follow her around because she was like gonna win. Um, anyway, so that was random, and I like it's not taking anything away from myself. Like I was really proud of myself for keeping it together in that moment and winning. Um, and I think that's a good example of I think she was objectively a better competition climber than I was, but I just sort of took advantage of that moment. But it's sort of way easier to be not expected to win and then all of a sudden it just randomly happened, to then flash forward to 2 years later, then I showed up and realized that people expected me to win. um, and then that was really hard for me,
Mm-hmm.
because then I think people you just start extrapolating what that means. Like, oh, people expect me to win, so then every single boulder should feel really easy. And then
Mm.
that's not how that works. So then when you pull on and something feels hard, then I would like panic. This feels hard. I only have 2 minutes left on the clock. And I would really start fixating like I do on just the tiny things and what they mean. And if I don't do this, maybe I'm not going to make semis. And then what if I don't make semifinals? And then that would be embarrassing. And then like it sort of would spiral into these, yeah, I guess more like obsessively negative expecting the worst outcome
Yeah.
situations, sort of like preparing myself for what would happen if I didn't succeed.
Yeah, it's a lot of like fear-based thinking, I suppose, isn't it? It's like
Yeah,
you're doing everything because you're scared of consequences X, Y, and Z
yeah,
instead of like I'm here to do my best in the moment.
And that year I actually got lucky. I barely made finals, barely scraped into finals in sixth. And then that was just by chance is like the best spot to be in a final because
Mhm.
you're out first. There's no pressure. You can't tell what anybody else has done because you're the first one out. And then I ended up winning that year. But yeah, part of me thinks that if I hadn't made finals in six, I don't know if I would have been able to keep it together and been able to handle the pressure if it wasn't
Mm.
situationally lifted.
Right, okay. So in those, that was the competition where someone was like, "Oh, you're expected to win," and that's when you scraped in sixth. Was that same
Yeah,
competition?
yeah,
Yeah, okay. So obviously it affected your performance in the semifinals, um, but then the pressure was lifted for the finals.
yeah, yeah,
Nice. Okay. And you started that story with like, well, that's when it really started to show. So it's interesting that you had this outcome where you actually won, but that was the competition where you were like, actually, this isn't one of my strengths.
yeah. I mean, that's sort of the most out of control mentally I think I've ever felt was just like, yeah, I just felt like I just started thinking that everything was random and I like my psychology was just so unhinged that I just felt like I forgot how to climb, like anything physical didn't matter anymore. Um, and I mean, I think that's also that was like sort of the start of me realizing it. And then it took a couple years, I think, after that, um, of just realizing that I was getting better and better, and my competition results were staying pretty much the same.
Mm,
Like I was performing pretty well domestically in Canada. I'd like won a couple nationals. Um, and then I made semifinals at a World Cup, but I never really did anything spectacular at the World Cup level either. And yeah, just sort of stayed the same throughout my whole like international career. Um, and yeah, like I said, I think competition climbing has so many emotions connected to it that it took me a long time to sort of separate like was I dreading going to this competition because I'm really nervous or do I actually not want to go? Like am I actually so miserable competing because like I don't like the pressure. I can't handle having to be on this exact day. Um and yeah, I think that took a long time for me to figure out like do I not want to go to this comp because I'm really scared of failure or do I really not enjoy this anymore? Um and that was hard because I think I don't like giving up and I don't like feeling like I'm giving up. Um, but I'd also realized that I was not happy competing anymore. Um, and that I wasn't handling the mental requirements of competing. Um, and that I was just better at climbing outside. And that was what suited my strengths better. Um, and yeah, I'm not, I mean, even just physically, I'm not very well rounded. I'm pretty good at grabbing on small holds and I've got a big reach. So like swinging sideways moves are easy, but that also means that pulling's hard and I'm not great at slopers. And there's like other things that I'm not physically good at. Um, and so climbing outside, you just are allowed to be less well-rounded. You just pick and choose which
yeah.
projects you want to take on.
Or even if you did want to work on your weaknesses, then not doing well on those boulders doesn't define your career.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Whereas like
Totally.
not being well rounded in a comp just means that you're unlikely to continue as a competitor, right? Like it doesn't disqualify you outdoors, it having big
Yeah.
weaknesses.
Yeah. Because yeah, when you're competing, if you have a strength that for sure that like absolutely stands out, you're sort of just waiting for that to be what matters in a comp, like to get lucky and turn around in a set and be like, oh, this is what I'm good at. Like, nice.
Yeah.
Um, and then have the boulder that there's sort of two options that would be ideal is the boulder that's your weakness is either so easy that you can do it or it's so hard that nobody can do it. And then it doesn't
Mm.
matter.
So it's just, I guess with competing, there's just so much that's outside your sphere of control. Whereas like
Yeah.
outdoors, there's just so much within your sphere of control. You can choose the challenges, you can back away from the challenges when you want, you can do the challenge on this day versus another day. You can be with these people, those people, you can pick the right conditions. Like there's just a lot to control. Um,
Yeah.
but I guess it does mean outdoors though that you can like pick more audacious goals. Like the boulders
Yeah,
within a competition are never going to be the hardest thing that you've ever climbed.
for sure. Yeah.
So I guess there are other challenges with outdoors as well, where like, spending months on one boulder problem has its own set of psychological challenges that aren't present within competitions.
Yeah.
But in terms of that kind of crazy pressure, it definitely is less challenging.
Yeah. And control was always definitely something for me too. I think that's like one of the first, I guess, mantras I remember ever being told, like growing up competing, was control what you can control and then let everything else go, and trying to focus on that in comps. But that, I mean, I think that pretty concisely sums up what was hard for me competing, was to let go of the things that I can't control. Because I would, I would fixate on who's coming to this competition, and how many, like I would count on the running order, like how many people do I think can beat me? And then
Mm,
I'd like, try to think about things in a very external way, and would really struggle to just think about, you know, it's just me and my climbing, and focus on that, which was in my
mm,
sphere of control. That was, I say was in the past tense, but I think that I struggled with that all the way up until I stopped competing.
mm-hmm. Yeah. And do you have a clear sense of like what the underlying mindset was there, if there was one, that was causing some of that negative thinking and like inability to let go of those things you couldn't control?
Um, yeah, I think, like I said, I mean, it's sort of, I said that climbing always felt like a safe space where I felt like I was confident, but I think that was mostly sort of in just like a day-to-day training sense. Like when I was in the gym, in terms of me being a confident person, like interacting with other people. But I think I always struggled to believe in myself and believe that I was good enough to be
Mm-hmm.
on the running order at a World Cup, or in a semifinal at a World Cup, or like I always struggled to believe I was at that level. Um, and so yeah, I think it was always that. It was like, I never saw myself, if I looked at a running order, I never saw like, oh, if I have a good day and I climb well, like I can win this competition. Like that mentality, I always struggled to find. Um,
Mm,
Even when I walk into isolation and somebody says, "Oh, well," you know, tells me that I'm expected to win, I even
mm,
immediately start being like, "Oh, well, she's here and she's here and she's here, and some days she's better than me and she's beat me before," and like that.
yeah.
So sort of thinking about where I stand amongst those people, and I always struggled to see myself belonging at the top, I think.
Mm. I guess as well, when you kind of lack that self-belief around, feeling like you belong at the top, then it's almost like you're more attached to those outcomes as well, right? It's like
Yeah.
you kind of need those results to reaffirm the belief that you can do it. And if you don't, then it feels like, I guess you start to feel really fragile in terms of your self-confidence. Um, so it's like kind of like a bit of a bad recipe. I guess the listeners don't know that you started doing some mental training work with me at the start of the year, and that was after you stopped competing. Like, how do you feel about your decision to leave the comps now? Do you ever feel like, oh, this is actually something I can change about my mindset, and maybe I could go back to it with like more skills in that psychological sphere? Or are you like, you're just so happy with your decision that you're kind of committed to it and you don't think you'll go back?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's hard for me to say like I've retired for good. Um, but I think I'm sort of just taking it as like there's a World Cup here in Salt Lake every year. and I go every year. And it's been, I think, 2 years now, 2 World Cups that I haven't been competing at. I've just been watching. Um, but I've both times just sort of used that as a gauge. Like I'm sitting in the audience and being like, man, do I wish I was up there competing? And both times have been not at all. Like I don't at all wish. I sort of just watch everybody competing. I'm like, man, that just looks so stressful. um, so yeah, at least for the moment, I don't see that being in my future. But if I end up in a situation where I am watching people compete, I think that's a good. I really love comps and I love being involved. So I think I'll always be attending them somehow. Or this year, I also started commentating for USA Climbing with Megan Martin. So I'm sort of in
Nice.
the scene still. And I think as I do that, if I ever found myself like wishing I was out there competing, um, then I think that'll be a good sign for me to delve back into it. Um, and I had a coach, and when I was an adult in Vancouver, I was working with Christian Core, and he is an Italian climber who was one of the first people to do V16, and he also won world championships a couple times and a couple bouldering World Cups. And he said for him, climbing outside was how he found that sense of belonging at the top.
Mm-hmm.
And for him, he felt like if he turned around on a boulder and was able to be like, I can climb V16, this boulder is nowhere near that hard, then that was sort of how he found the confidence that he needed.
Mm.
I mean, I think it's a bit of a double-edged sword. I think when he was competing, it was the stylistically more similar to climbing outside. I think there
Mm.
was less slab and less coordination, and less things that required a different kind of practice. Um, but I think that's also a really reasonable mentality, is like if you've climbed hard things outside, then you know when you're competing that they're going to be easier than that. Um, so I could see that mentality being helpful for me too if I decided I wanted to go back. Um, I think I'll do competitions here and there that aren't
Mm-hmm.
necessarily World Cups or trying to qualify for the Olympics or whatever that looks like. But um, but yeah, that's been a nice gauge for me, is to go to comps in some capacity and really think about if I would like to be out there competing with everybody or not. And so far it's been not. So
Yeah. I think that's a great test because you're really listening to like where you actually want to be. So it's not like, oh, where do other people want me to be, or, any of those external pressures, or even just like, oh, I'm scared of missing out. It's more just like the real test is like, do you actually feel that pull towards the comps? Um, so yeah, I guess just keep listening to that. Um, so you've chosen to sort of move into more outdoor climbing, or well, commit fully to outdoor climbing. What's that journey looked like for you? How long now have you been fully committed to outdoor climbing?
that was, I want to say, like fall 2021. So almost
Okay.
2 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and how's that been? Like, yeah, tell us more about it.
Um, I mean, I think it's been a process of unlearning that system of doubt that I had, that was like a tactic in competition, because that just doesn't, when you're trying to climb really hard, like that does not help at all. There's no point in doing that. Um, but yeah, I think it's just been a slow process of me convincing myself that I can climb boulders that are as hard as other people tell me I can climb. Because I think for a long time people would say like, "Oh, you for sure can climb V13 outside," and I'd go, "Oh no, I don't think that. Like, I don't think that's true," and sort of brush it off. And so it was cool to have the opportunity to really delve into it and start to slowly believe that I could, um, and get more and more ambitious projects. And I mean, it was nice at first because I also I moved to Salt Lake 3 years ago, almost exactly. Um, and just living in a new place, everything's new. And there are a bunch of boulders in Joe's Valley that suit me really well that are V13 level. And so that was nice because I could just tick some hard boulders off relatively fast because they just suited me so well. And it was like the holds I like. And most recently, as we've talked about a couple times, but now the boulders that are left are a little bit harder, a little bit less perfectly suited to my style. So that's just been interesting. It's sort of left things for me to project for longer because they're not exactly what I would say I'm good at. But yeah, it's been really fun. I think I have finally started to try to set more ambitious goals for myself and be less afraid of failing, because what's been nice for me is you don't have obviously those giant crowds anymore, so I can allow myself to set big goals in my head or out loud, and then if the worst case scenario is you don't do them, and that seems less daunting to me now, I think.
Yeah, it's interesting. So you're talking about self-belief a lot when you're talking about competing. And it's interesting to me, like, because it seems like you're really building a lot of self-belief in outdoor climbing as you kind of pick bigger goals and like see them through to completion and learn a lot from the processes. But you obviously got like really good competition results in your career as well. So what do you think the difference is there? Like, why didn't you build self-belief when competing, but you have done with your journey with outdoor climbing?
Yeah, I think it's a bit of I think I'm still learning it in outdoor climbing as well. Um, yeah, I think I've always had something. It applies to both, but something I've always had is this idea that if I'm as good as I want to be, that things are just going to feel easy, and that for the people that are the best, they do hard things and they make them look easy. And so I think I struggle with that climbing outside too, is remembering that like I have to try hard. Like just because I'm going to do the boulder doesn't mean I'm just going to like float through it, even though it looks like that maybe like on camera from the outside or whatever. Like I think in my head mentally, I always think like, oh, if I'm going to do this boulder, it's just going to feel easy.
Mm.
And so I like when it doesn't feel easy, I almost give up sometimes when I'm projecting. Like the foot feels bad, or like I'm lining up to go to the next hold and all the holds feel bad because I'm pumped. And then I sort of just am like, oh, well, this isn't the time I send. Um, where if I look back on some of the hard things I've done, that's not true at all. Like you usually have to try pretty hard to climb something that's hard. Obviously,
In those
but
moments, can't you just get Adam Ondra on the screen and just listen to all his power
I
screaming and
know,
be
I
like,
know, I know. Um, but yeah, I think that was something in comps too. I would just like maybe not try as hard as I could all the time just because something didn't feel easy. And so I would think I was doing it wrong, or I wouldn't trust that I had the right beta, or whatever that is. And I also think I would really internalize bad results too. Um,
mm,
I think bad days on a project are easier to forget. Because like I said, it's something that's objective and measurable. So like if I have a good session on a boulder, I can always remember back to that session and skip over the last two that were bad and be like, well, I had that one session that was good, so I know that I can do it because it's the exact same boulder. Whereas when you're competing and you have a few bad comp results, I would really let those get to me. And you can obviously recall back to a good comp result, but it's not the exact same situation.
mm. So then you can sort of just like make excuses and say, oh, well, that day I had X, Y, and Z helping me out, sort of
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah. Or like, I won that day, but the person who came in second had a really bad day. So,
Mm,
that's abnormal. That was just lucky. Like I think I mean, at a lot of points I was quite negative on myself. Like I think the times when I did well, it was luck. And with the times when I did badly, I was like, that's really where I am at. So I think I would really internalize and relate to those poor experiences and then write my successes off as luck.
Yeah, which I guess, even though it's not quite right if you're looking at it objectively, but when things are outside your sphere of control, you're more able to do that. Whereas because if outdoor bouldering is more within your sphere of control, you kind of like have to be proud of yourself and take the wins because you're like, well, I actually controlled all those things. You can have a
Right.
good conditions day, but it's not enough to, you can't, like, doesn't matter how good the conditions are, they're not going to float you up the route. But if literally everyone else drops out of the condition, out of a comp, and you have the
You're the only
worst
one there.
day, you
Yeah.
still win.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I mean, and outdoor bouldering sometimes, or sport climbing or any discipline, sometimes it does take luck. You have to hit that hold right, and sometimes you just wait for for the time that you do, but you have the time, and you can go back to it and you can sort of just wait for that time when you get lucky. Whereas I think I would always, when I was competing and I did well, I would always say like, oh, that was just this crazy, like, stars aligned, and then I pulled it out of the bag, and like that was just this wild coincidence situation. um and yeah, I think I always struggled to internalize those moments as wins instead of the negative moments as losses.
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting. Um, Now that you're climbing outdoors, what of that kind of, you said you've got like a weakness around your psychology. What's carried over, what hasn't carried over, and what are you still kind of currently working on with your mindset, specifically for outdoor bouldering?
um yeah, I think definitely being able to like fight and try hard even when it doesn't feel easy is one of them for sure, because I think um I mean, I've also, sounds weird, but I've also done pretty hard boulders that have felt not so hard to me. Um, just because they, like I said, they've been exactly my style. And so I've been way easier. It's been way easier for me to like continue to try hard. Um, but yeah, I think to not go into a negative spiral like I would in competitions. I think that's easy for me to do outside too. Try the boulder one time, and the first day, or not the first day, but you go for a session on your project and you try one try and it feels bad because I mean, if I look at it now when I'm not sitting under the boulder and I'm able to be level headed, I'm probably not warm yet, or I like hit the first hold wrong or whatever. It's like your first try. But my tendency is to, as soon as I try it, just be like, oh, it feels bad. It's not going to go today. Uh, I feel terrible. The boulder feels terrible. All the holds feel bad. Like I think it's been me trying to learn to be patient, even just within the same session, and still focus on the things that I can control, um,
Mm-hmm.
and let go of the other things and be able to be more mindful and focus on the process. Um, because I think you are allowed to do that in a much more immediate way climbing outside versus competing. Because like focusing on the process when you're competing is like this whole huge sphere of like I'm focusing on my training every day and like getting stronger, and you have to be so much more internal and focused on just you. um
Mm.
and so it's been easier for me to learn to be mindful while climbing outside just because there's other things to focus on. And so we've talked about a couple mental tactics, but my latest ones that I've been enjoying is just like looking away from the boulder and focusing on like I'm outside and it's really beautiful where I am, and like being grateful to just be outside and to be able to climb on this boulder and to live somewhere where climbing is easily accessible and all these things. And I think that ability to have gratitude for those things has been something that recenters me, um, instead of just sitting under the boulder glaring at all the holds. Um, so yeah, I think it's been easier for me to learn mindfulness climbing outside because it's more obvious to me for some reason what the process is and what I should be focusing on.
I guess there's fewer distractions as well. Like it's
Yeah,
really hard to be present when there's so many things that are distracting us and like a crowd full of people shouting and competitors around you performing and their performances all affect your result. you know that's pretty distracting, isn't it? I mean, there's probably
for
not
sure.
much that anything else that could be more distracting than that. Whereas like being in nature, already you're calmer, already you're more able to be present. um so yeah, I can totally see that. I used to do the comps, but it's so long ago now, and it was just such a different thing back then. Like it just wasn't as serious. Like I was on the British team, but it was like a joke British team. It was like, come and there's just volunteers, training people. Like no one's a professional, like that kind of thing. So it wasn't as high pressure as it is now. But I still experienced that, the kind of setting and everything. Um, but back to outdoor stuff, how have you, or what tools have you used to try to mitigate some of that fear of failure? So it sounds like with the competitions, you were quite like outcome focused, like thinking a lot about the result rather than like how you're climbing in that moment. And you've mentioned that like you use tools when you're out of the boulders. Is there anything that you've been doing around your mindset um, that help you let go of the outcome a little bit? Because I guess we in outdoors there is still pressure, isn't there? Like maybe you could talk about it in relation to the pagan poetry sit, which you just did. Um, because you did try that quite a few times. And I guess when we start to invest in something outdoors, we can start to become pretty attached to the outcome and fearful of not succeeding.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely have that for sure. Um, and it's hard for me to have a strategy and use it in a moment. I think that's like what we've been working on. So I've been doing it backwards. I think like thinking about what mentality I want to have when I'm not there, and then hopefully eventually it'll be able to happen in the moment as well. Um, I think I just was able to like aware of the fact that I enjoyed going there. Like I like driving Boulder. I like going there alone with all my pads and setting all the pads up and chalking all the like I really genuinely do like the process. I like that boulder a lot. I really like the moves. And I also was considering like it sounds sort of weird, but I was like, okay, even if when I send this boulder, I just am gonna have to look for a different boulder to do. And I really like this one. So I was like, worst case scenario is I have to come back and try this boulder again. I mean, I don't know if that tactic like is going to work long term because I think eventually you'll definitely get sick of it. But I think I sort of was able to reflect on the fact that the worst case scenario right now is that I don't, which is interesting because that was when I used that tactic in a negative way, competing, saying the worst case, like oh, what if I come in last? Like all these people could beat me and I'm going to come in last. Wasn't necessarily good. Um, but outside, I sort of am able to be like, I know I can do this boulder and I can acknowledge that I can do this boulder and internalize that, but it's also okay if it's not right now. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so I think that's sort of what I'm trying to get to the point of learning is of sort of balancing all of those things, like acknowledging
Mm-hmm.
that I can do the boulder, acknowledging that it's okay if it's not right now, but also trying hard as if it could be right now. Like I think all those three things are really hard to balance for me. Um, so I think if I focus on too much on like it'll happen when it happens, and I'll just climb, and one day it'll just feel easy and I'll float all the way to the top, then it's not going to happen, because then I forget to try hard and I, hit one hold wrong and give up. Um, so yeah, I think that's been the struggle for me outside mentally, is learning how to balance those three things. Um,
Yeah.
knowing that I can do it eventually, feeling okay, it's not on a specific day, but then also trying hard like it was gonna be that day. So
I mean, I think what you described there is like really the crux of projecting, isn't it, really? Or kind of outdoor climbing in general, and kind of performance in general, really, because you want to try really, really hard, but you also can't force it. You also can't put too much pressure on yourself. You also don't want to be like distracted and fearful. And as soon as you're like, I've already got to do this thing, then it all of a sudden becomes like fearful, and you're in this distracted mindset. So, and it's almost like that skill is a skill in itself, isn't it, to balance those things you've mentioned. And it's kind of like it does take quite a long time to master that skill, if like we ever fully get there. So yes, it's interesting, the way you put it. And I guess like a few of the tactics you're using are like it really just helping you to feel positive and present. So you're like using mindfulness tools and gratitude tools, and also reminding yourself like that you can do it, which makes you feel positive, but it doesn't have to be today, which also makes you feel positive, and that you're really enjoying what you're doing, which also makes you feel positive. Um, so
and I also think for me it's been also that it's okay that it's hard for me to let go of the outcome. And that will just be a process of learning how to be mindful, and that coming back to like caring about the outcome, I think is also okay, like when it's timed correctly. Because I think we all care about, there's a reason we're going to the same, dark cave every day, trying the same thing over and over again. I think it's because you, at the end of the day, also care about the outcome. Um, but I think it's just the timing of that and being able to let go of that when it matters. Um, and and yeah, I don't know. I think climbers sometimes fall also into this trap of like feeling like they need to be like too cool to care.
mm,
Like, really caring about something is like not cool. It's not seen as
yeah.
like, yeah, I don't know. And so I think that has been just, I don't know, interesting, I think, to see. Um, especially we've talked about a little bit. I've just been trying boulders that are really popular right now. So there's just a ton
Mm,
of people always there. Um, and I think that has been a hard vibe for me to get right, because I think a lot of people that are there, which is fine, are like there just like touching the holds of it because it's cool and it's all over Instagram and it's a popular boulder. And so they're just like seeing if they could do one of the moves, and they're just like hanging out and it's sunny and they're like drinking, like whatever the vibe is. Whereas like I am like super committed to this one boulder, and I've been to this boulder 9 sessions in a row, and I really want to do it and I really care about it. It's just like a totally different vibe. And so that it has also been a struggle to like want your mindset to be so perfect, but then have other people there that have a different value, I guess, in the outcome, just because whatever, they're
mm,
on vacation, it's their first time there. Um, and so that, I mean, on that pagan boulder in particular, that was key actually to doing it, was just ending up being there when nobody was there, so that I could
mm.
be in whatever mindset I needed to be in, and it wasn't affected by other people.
Yeah, yeah, that's really big. And didn't you also listen to music on that as well? And that really helped you get in that kind of those like right arousal levels. Um,
Yeah,
like the sort of like the right kind of try hard and alertness versus also like not too amped up.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. I know, I totally did. That was really key for sure. Was I think I was resistant to it just because like, I mean, I just didn't want to be that guy that like has headphones in at the boulder. I don't know. That just, you're always like, wow, we're out here. It's such a nice day. We're out in nature, and this girl's just got headphones in on the boulder. So I think I was resisting being that person, but I think at this point it like helps me so much to be able to be focused on the climbing and to try hard that it's worth being that guy.
You were
So
also on your own that day as well, so it wasn't like
that
you were
day
just
I was
like
on
being
my own.
rude,
Yeah. Yeah.
like bye guys, I'm
It's
closing
true.
you out.
It's true. And at least I wasn't playing it out loud, so
Yeah, that's even worse.
exactly.
It's interesting what you're saying about the outcome there, because I guess that really what you're talking about is like what our motivations are. Like what are we motivated for? Is it to tick the boulder, or is it to like have experiences on the boulder? And I think there's sort of different schools of thought around that, and mine is that you kind of want both. Like it's nice to complete things and to see things through, and like when we succeed in climbs, like we that's how we know that like our processes are working, whether they're mental or physical. And so like it's nice to see a process to an end. It's sort of like, it's like how you want to finish a book and not leave a book unfinished. Like you just want to see things through, and you also want that confirmation, and like it's really like succeeding in our goals is really good for confidence and like all of that. But at the same time, if we only value the outcome, then we're just not invested in the process. Like we don't want to do the work. We're not like feeling that positive when we're there. We're not feeling that present. So I feel like it's a complete balance, and really you like want both. Like how balanced do you feel like you've been in your motivations with that respect? And like, do you want to make any changes to what you're motivated for and how you're motivated with these big projects?
Yeah, I think when I first started working with you, even it was definitely an imbalance towards the outcome. Like every time I went to a boulder, that's all I cared about was doing it. And then if I wasn't doing it that day, I was like super emotional and upset about it. Um, and I think I've stopped that for sure in a lot of ways. Still not perfect, obviously, but it's way better than it used to be. But I do think I've also had some days where I've like, which is nice. I mean, I think I'm still finding that balance, I guess is what I'm saying. But I've also had some days where I've gone to the boulder and just been like, oh, I'm just gonna like focus on doing the moves today. And then I like leave or sometimes watch the video back, and I'm watching myself let go. Like I'm getting to a point where I like it feels hard, and I just like I'm like I because I think that's what's nice about recording yourself is that I watched the video back, and I'm watching myself climb and being like, I literally did not try. I fell straight down. Like I did not fall moving. No, my foot didn't pop. I literally let go. And so I think I've also had days where I've been just going for the sake of going, and not going with the purpose of sending in mind too. Um, and then had a hard time, like we talked about, like hitting that right arousal level and being psyched to try to do it, to actually like get from the bottom of the boulder to the top of the boulder. And I don't know if that's necessarily like too focused on the process, but and more just like going through the motions of going to the boulder. Like maybe I was tired and I probably shouldn't have gone at all, or whatever the solution is there. But I think I've now had situations where I've been on both ends of the spectrum of being like too focused on the outcome and then not able to be mindful about every single move, and then also gone to the boulder and just been like, well, we'll just be here another day and like grab the holds and not really feeling connected to wanting the outcome.
Yeah, that's interesting. I would say though that I think you can you can definitely try really hard because you just like with all these things, it's just so personal because I'm just someone like I always try hard, whether I think I'm going to do it or think I can do it or not. And I've also coached people who they actually don't try hard because they care too much about the outcome, which I know sounds like contradictory, but because they care so much about the outcome, if they're say for example they're trying like the third and fourth moves of a boulder and they find those moves hard, then they like disengage from the challenge completely because they're like, well, if I can't get like if I'm only on these moves, why bother trying? Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So like I think what I'm trying to say is sort of like the balance of motivations that you're managing right now, it's not always like that for people who might be too outcome oriented or not outcome oriented enough, if you know what I mean. Like
Mm-hmm.
it can yield like try hard whichever way, or the opposite. But what I have noticed as a coach is that when I work with someone around their motivations, say they've noticed they're like too extrinsically motivated, so they care too much about the outcome and not enough about the process. If they reduce those extrinsic motivators, all of a sudden they find that they're just not motivated enough in general because they've just taken motivation away from the big motivation part. Um, so it's like if you take some motivation away, you've got to replace it with like more process-based motivation, but you want that more process-based motivation to look like trying hard, even if,
Yeah, I mean,
do you know what I
I
mean?
think that's probably what's happening for me, I think, for sure, is like I'm learning to let go of the extrinsic things, but then nothing is left. So I think that's sort of what I'm working on. In terms of like, I mean, that maybe looks like setting different goals. Like if I find myself getting to the hard part and when I'm at the hard part of the boulder and I'm pumped, I'm letting go, like making the goal for the day to like fall moving towards the next hold or something and have there be a motivation for the day, but maybe one that is a high point or that represents progress and not, and then if that results in me moving towards the next hold and then grabbing the next hold, like that's great. But um, having smaller goals for the day that represent progress and maybe aren't necessarily like, which I mean is still an outcome goal in some ways, but is more focused on improvement and not like succeeding necessarily at the boulder.
Yeah, and then you can also have the process goal of like, today I succeed if I actually just try my hardest. Like
Yeah.
if I'm and so it's open-ended because I guess you can kind of try harder, or you can try harder on a different higher up the boulder problem or whatever. Um and sort of like you can also have that motivation like, yeah, I really enjoy trying hard, so it's motivating for me to have that as an intrinsic motivator. Just I like sort of trying hard. um and yeah, I guess like what you're working towards is to kind of like get that balance right. Do you feel like you've experienced that yet with any of your recent projects where you felt like you've showed up and like the balance has just been right and it's really helped your performance that day?
um yeah, I think I have, but I think funnily enough, I think it's been both the times that I can think of have been times when I haven't actually done the boulder. Like it haven't been like, I think both times have been unexpected because there was no pressure necessarily. Um, and both times have been times where I got like a really good high point on a boulder and then thought, oh, if I come back rested, I'll just do it. And then both times then have created too much outcome pressure after the fact and then had multiple sessions of like regression because I had a high point and now I'm like So I think I've had times when the psychology has been really perfect and then worked to a high point, and then both times have regressed backwards for multiple sessions. And then yeah, and then the send wasn't necessarily perfect either. That was sort of more of a battle through the mental things, but yeah, I think hopefully it'll be more consistent, and that won't necessarily be a trend forever, but I think I definitely have had moments where it's felt close to perfect.
Nice. I mean, that's cool because that's so hard to do. We
Yeah.
don't talk about this enough in climbing about, that perfect balance of, caring but not caring, and being process and outcome oriented. And I think it's also important to see that like really good performances are separate from sending. You can have
Hmm.
like a really amazing performance where you were like really focused in the moment, but if that's just not the day that you sent, then it's not the day that you sent. Because maybe some other physical factors kind of prevented you from sending that day.
Yeah, for sure.
Um, so I'll wrap up soon, but I just wanted to ask you, what goals? I mean, you don't have to tell us what your goals are, but I'm just interested, like, you're obviously working a lot on your psychology. How does that fit in with some of the big goals that you have set for yourself, or that, maybe aren't fully defined yet, but are kind of like the dream for the future?
Yeah, I mean, I think just generally, I think the most sessions I've sorry, ever put in to a boulder is 10-ish, give or take a few. Um, which feels like a lot in the moment, like when I'm working on something, but I think in the grand scheme of thing isn't that many. So I think I would like to find something that's hard enough that it feels out of reach, um, but that I can convince myself is possible. That might take multiple seasons or, multiple tens of sessions. But that'll require a different kind of psychology than I've had in the past. Um, just obviously coming from comps, the thought of spending more than 10 sessions on the same boulder is wild, but that's how people do their hardest projects. So I think, yeah, I want to find a boulder that I feel like really suits me and that feels possible, even if it feels really hard, and commit to focusing on the process enough, um, and still being able to feel confident that it'll happen one day. Um, but yeah, I think that psychology is really going to need to be dialed if I want to delve into something that is hard for me.
Nice, cool. Well, I mean, it's great that you've got these smaller goals where you can learn these skills, right? Because you can't just go from competing to picking that massive goal, because you won't have built those skills. So it
Yeah,
sounds like you're on a really good journey with it.
hopefully.
Yeah. Cool. Well, thanks so much for that chat. It was really interesting. I think people will be able to like take a lot away from it, and probably can relate to a lot of it, even if they don't climb as hard as you do or have competed.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what's really cool about climbing is it's just, yeah, whatever level you're at, it's the same battle really at the end of the day. So
Especially when it comes to psychology, all the same
yeah,
things
yeah,
are going
for
on for
sure.
you, if it's your 6A project or your 9A project or whatever.
Yeah, for real.
Nice, cool. Thanks, Allison.
Thanks.